Welcome to the 24th tutorial of my Tableau Server Client series. This series is dedicated to showcasing how to use Tableau Server Client to automate various tasks. In this video, I'll walk you through how to access users' personal spaces on your Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud instance using Tableau Server Client for auditing purposes. To access personal spaces aside from your own, regardless of method, you must be a server administrator or site administrator. For this reason, I will use concepts I have covered in previous videos to create a new project dedicated to the audit and move all personal space workbooks to that project. In doing so, those users involved in the audit do not need to have server or site admin privileges. To showcase how this can be done, let us jump over to Visual Studio Code to begin developing a script that makes this auditing exercise possible. Okay, to get started, we're going to want to run this initial configuration/setup block. This block is responsible for creating an authentication object and a Tableau Server Client object. Through those two things, we will authenticate and sign into my Tableau Cloud instance. If you're unfamiliar with this block of code, I highly recommend you checking out tutorial 2 of this series. In that tutorial, I walk you through signing in to your Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud instance for the first time. Okay, let's go ahead and run this. All right, so we know the block is configured correctly. It's successfully executed. What we're going to do next is we're going to gather all our workbooks that are located in users' personal spaces across my Tableau Cloud instance and move those into an audit area. So this audit area is going to be a project that I create here on within this tutorial, and that project is going to be called Personal Space Audit. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through everybody's personal spaces and move those workbooks that reside in those areas to this project for auditing purposes. So let's go ahead and do that. So how are we going to identify a normal workbook from a workbook that resides in a personal space? Well, for every workbook object or item that's maintained on your Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud instance, there's an attribute maintained for it called project name. And that name, if it resides in a personal space, it's going to be none. So it's going to be empty. Otherwise, it's going to contain the value for the project for which it resides in. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So to do this, we're going to say workbooks is equal to, I'll say workbook for workbook in tsc.pager server.workbooks. What I'm doing here is I'm going to use list comprehension to retrieve all the workbooks on my server using the workbooks endpoint. So this will do that. And then what we'll do here is we're going to look at these. So I want to show you for each of these workbooks. So let's just say workbooks. So we're going to see a list containing all of the workbooks that are maintained on my Tableau Cloud instance. So we have quite a few. I think there's like 8 here. And what you're going to see is for those workbooks that do not reside in the personal space, let's just look at the first one. So I'm going to say workbooks 0._dix. Let's look at those attributes that are maintained for every workbook. For this one, it sits within a project called samples. All right. Now, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, if the workbook is in a personal space, it will not have a project name. So how are we going to do that? We're just going to modify this list comprehension. So I'm going to say if workbook.project name is none. And again, so the attribute maintained for a workbook for the project name is project_name. And we're looking for those that reside in personal spaces, and that is going to be given away by the fact that there is no project name. Let's go ahead and do this again. Okay, and what we're expecting now to be in this list is a list of personal space workbooks. When I'll say before this tutorial, I created 3 personal space workbooks that sit in my personal space, and they're called Personal Space Report 1, 2, and 3. Let's go ahead and run this. And we're going to see, okay, well, the 3 workbooks we retrieved using this block here, or this list comprehension, are those personal space workbooks. So I call them, again, Personal Space Report 1, 2, and 3. And the idea now here is to move all of these personal space workbooks or content from the user's personal space to a project on your server or Tableau Cloud instance called Personal Space Audit. So to do that, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to revisit a concept that I showcased in tutorial 18 on modifying projects. We're going to create a project here and move those workbooks into that project. So what we're going to do is just say new project is equal to tsc.project item. And to create a new project item, we need to provide a name and a description. So the name here, let's just say name is equal to Personal Space Audit. And let's say description is equal to the projects for which the personal space audit will take place. All right, so that is a project item. And what we need to do here, so we haven't created this technically, right? We have a project item, so an object that is a project. What we need to do is we need to actually use the create method at the project's endpoint to make this project be available on my Tableau Cloud instance. So let's do that now. So I'm going to say server.projects, again, project's endpoint. And we're going to use the create method. And I'm going to say project item. So what am I trying to create? I'm trying to create this new project. Now, what this will do is it will create that project with the name of Personal Space Audit and a description of this. And this will be a top level project because I have not specifically said or indicated that it's going to sit within another project folder. So it's not going to be nested anywhere. It's going to be a top level project. So if I run this now, it will create that. So let's go ahead and do this. But what I want to do is I'm going to run this just to show this creates the project, and then I'm going to delete it so that we can go through with the next steps. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so this executed successfully. And what I want to do is I want to switch over to my Tableau Cloud instance very quickly and showcase this was created. Okay, so we're on my Tableau Cloud instance. I have a variety of top level projects. And what we're expecting is whenever I hit refresh is we're expecting there to be a new top level project called Personal Space Audit. That is the result of me just running that block of code. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, and here it is. So we have a Personal Space Audit project with no workbooks in it. The next step we're going to do, and I'm going to delete this because I want to do this in a single execution. So I'm going to remove this real quick. So let's go ahead and delete this manually. And let's jump back over to Visual Studio Code to do the rest of this tutorial. Okay, so our next thing, I have a little comment here that says we need to allow sufficient time for the new product to be indexed on the server before retrieving the product ID. So the reason I say this is, and I mentioned this is because if you try to do what we're going to do next, right? So the whole idea of this is to take this, to identify those personal space workbooks in people's personal spaces and move them into a project that we just created. Well, if I call the create method at the project's endpoint, here I create the project and subsequently I try to move them into that project. Well, if I don't allow sufficient time, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an error because I'm going to reference a project that has not yet been indexed on my server or cloud instance. And basically what that means is you're going to try to move workbooks to a project that it doesn't recognize as existing yet. So you need to give it like a second or two, right? Because there is some delay between your post request to create a project and the time for which it can be accessed. So what I'm going to do here is you may have noticed that I imported time. I'm going to use time.sleep to wait 2 seconds. So artificially delay this 2 seconds. And then I'm going to say new project ID. So why am I getting this project ID? Well, if I'm going to move the workbooks to a project, I need to know the ID or the LUID, so the local unique identifier value corresponding to that project for which I'm trying to move them to, right? So I need to gather that. And that, again, that project ID is going to be the one that corresponds to this product that we just created. So I'm going to say new project ID is equal to server.projects.filter. Name is equal to personal space audit. What this is going to do, so it's a query set object, not the most fun things to work with, but essentially what this is going to do is it's going to retrieve a project or projects with the name of Personal Space Audit. In this case, there is only one. I'm going to access that first item in that query set, and I'm going to access the ID attribute maintained for that project. So just like workbooks, every project has a series of attributes that are maintained, and one of them is the ID. So I'm going to do that, and that's going to be the new project ID. The next step is I need to move these into that project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate through the workbooks. So these 3 workbooks that you see down here that we identified as residing in personal spaces, I'm going to iterate through those. And for each of those, I'm going to update the project ID value. So the first step to do that, right, is I'm going to say workbook.project ID is equal to new project ID. So this portion here doesn't technically do anything on my server yet, right? So this is just going to take that workbook object that you see here, and it's going to adjust the project ID to reflect the project ID associated with Personal Space Audit. So instead of residing in a personal space, it's going to have a value corresponding to this project. Now, Where the action actually takes place is when we use the update endpoint to update the workbooks attributes. So I'm going to say server.update, and this actually needs to be server.workbooks because we're using the workbooks endpoint. We're using the update method, and I'm going to say workbook. So this essentially, for each of these workbooks, these 3 workbooks, is going to update the project ID value, and as a result, it's going to be moved. So that's how you remove any type of object, whether it be a data source, a flow, a workbook. If you want to move something, you need to update the project ID value. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. All right, so it's successfully executed. So what we're expecting now is if I jump back over to my Tableau Cloud, and since we're expecting these 3 workbooks here, so Personal Space Report 1, 2, and 3, to reside in the Personal Space Audit folder. Let's jump back over there very quickly. All right, so let's refresh. We created that, again, so as a result of executing that block of code, after I manually removed this Personal Space Audit project, I recreated it, right? So in that block of code, there was a create step to create this project. So I'm going to click in here, and we're going to see those 3 Personal Space reports. All right, so now we're set to go, right? So just imagine you just iterated, or you just gathered all of the workbooks that reside in your tens or hundreds or maybe even thousands of users on your cloud instance or server. You've gathered them, and then you updated each of their project ID values to reflect the working area for your audits, right? So your auditors will come in here, and they will be able to take a look at each of these workbooks and do their job, right? So perform the audits. Okay. So that wraps up this video on accessing users' personal spaces programmatically through Tableau Server Clients for audit purposes. I hope you found this tutorial useful and can use the concepts I've covered to level up your ability to manage your own Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud instance through automation. If you enjoyed this video, then please like the video and subscribe to my channel for notifications on future videos. Thank you again, and see you next time.